Okay, let's unpack this. I want to start today with a choice. It's a hypothetical, but I want you, and I'm talking to everyone listening right now, on your commute, at the gym, wherever you are, I want you to really visualize this scenario.
Right.
It's a bit grim, I'll warn you, but stick with me because it exposes something truly, truly bizarre about how our minds work.
I'm listening. I'm ready to be grim.
All right, imagine you are forced to undergo a painful experience. Let's just say, for argument's sake, it involves putting your hand in freezing cold water.
Okay.
And when I say freezing, I mean 13 degrees Celsius. That's
Right.
about 57 Fahrenheit. It's not just chilly, it really shocks the system. It hurts. Your knuckles ache, your skin starts to sting.
Yeah, that's properly cold. Unpleasant.
Very unpleasant.
Yeah.
So you're in this situation, and you have exactly two options for how this is all going to play out.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Here's option A. You hold your hand in that freezing water for exactly 60 seconds, 1 minute. Then, right at the 60-second mark, you pull it out. Someone hands you a warm, fluffy towel, you dry off, and it is over. The pain stops completely.
Okay. Option A is 60 seconds of pain. Pretty straightforward.
Right. Now here is option B. You hold your hand in that exact same freezing water for 60 seconds. But then, you are forced to keep it there for an additional 30 seconds.
No.
So now we're looking at 90 seconds total in the water. However, in those last 30 seconds, that extra time you didn't have in option A. Option A, the water warms up just a tiny bit. It goes from 14 degrees to 15 degrees.
Okay, so it's still painful.
Oh yeah, it's still painful, mind you. It's still freezing cold. But just is slightly less intense than that first minute. Then at 90 seconds, it ends.
Yeah.
So which one do you choose?
Well, looking at it logically, as a rational person who, wants to minimize suffering, I have to choose option A.
And why is that? Can you walk me through the logic?
Because it's just basic arithmetic, right? Option A is 60 seconds of a certain level of pain. Option B has that exact same 60 seconds of pain plus another 30 seconds of pain.
Right, extra pain.
Yeah, even if that extra 30 seconds is slightly less intense, it is still pain that I don't need to experience. Strictly speaking, option B is objectively worse. It contains more total pain. Any rational person chooses option A every single time.
Exactly. That feels like the obvious answer. It
Yeah.
feels like the only answer. I mean, why would anyone sign up for 30 extra seconds of misery? It seems to defy basic math, survival instincts, everything.
It's a no-brainer.
But, and here's where it gets really, really interesting. The research we're diving into today shows that under these specific circumstances, the vast majority of human beings, people just like you and me, will actually choose option B.
They choose the longer duration of pain.
They choose the longer duration of pain.
And that paradox, that specific, repeatable glitch in our decision-making process, that is exactly where we're heading today. We're looking at a stack of research centered on a concept called the two selves.
The two selves.
It's a deep dive into behavioral psychology,
Yeah.
utility theory, and a fundamental conflict that exists inside every single one of us.
It's the conflict between what the material calls the experiencing self and the remembering self.
Precisely. This research essentially takes a sledgehammer to the idea that humans are rational decision makers. We tend to think that we make choices to maximize our happiness and minimize our pain. We think we're the logical captains of our own ship.
Of course.
But the source material, drawing largely from the work of Nobel Prize winner Daniel Kahneman and his colleagues, shows that we are subject to this massive cognitive illusion. We don't choose based on what we actually experience moment to moment. We choose based on the story we tell ourselves about the experience later on.
So our mission today is to figure out why we are wired this way. Why do we consistently make decisions that result in more suffering for our future selves, all because of a strange quirk in how our memory works?
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it's not just about cold water or, physical pain in a lab. This explains so much. It explains how we value our vacations, how we judge our relationships, how we plan our retirements, and even how we look back on our lives as a whole.
That's a huge claim.
It is, because it forces us to ask a really uncomfortable question. Which self actually matters more? The one living through the moment right now? Or the one looking back and, as the source material puts it, keeping score?
I love that phrasing, keeping score. Because as we go through this, it really does feel like our brains are keeping a score that doesn't match the reality of the game we're actually playing.
That's a perfect way to put it.
To really get this, we have to go back to basics. We have to talk about a word that gets thrown around a lot in economics, but maybe isn't fully understood in just regular conversation.
Yeah.
The word utility.
Yes. Utility. It's a heavy word with a kind of split personality. And to understand the error we make in our decision making, we have to understand the history of this word because the definition has actually shifted over time. That shift has caused a lot of confusion in how we understand human behavior.
So take us back. Where did this concept start? Who coined it?
We have to go back to the 18th and 19th centuries to Jeremy Bentham. He was a British philosopher, a jurist, and really the father of the utilitarianism movement. And he opens his most famous work, Introduction to the Principles of Morals and Legislation, with this incredibly grand, almost biblical sentence. He says, "Nature has placed mankind under the governance of two sovereign masters, pain and pleasure."
Two sovereign masters.
That is very dramatic. It sounds like something from a fantasy novel.
It was dramatic, but for Bentham, it was completely literal. He believed that everything we do, every choice we make, is governed by these two forces. And for Bentham, utility was about that raw feeling. It was about the actual experience of pleasure or the experience of pain.
So not an abstract idea, it's the feeling itself.
Exactly. In fact, the source material mentions that Bentham actually apologized for even using the word utility.
He apologized. Why would he do that?
He felt it was too dry, too cold. He thought utility sounded too functional, like a tool or utensil. He wanted a word that really captured what he called hedonic experience, the actual visceral feeling of being happy or sad, hurt or comforted. He wanted to convey the sensation of life as it happens, moment by moment. Okay, so that's definition number one. Utility equals how it feels. The ouch or the yum, the actual experience.
Correct. We call that experienced utility. It's the reality of the moment. But over the last 100 years or so, modern economists, the people building the models that explain our markets, they sort of hijacked the word.
Hijacked it. How?
They kept the term utility, but they changed the meaning completely. For a modern economist, utility doesn't mean how it feels. It means wantability.
Wantability. That's a strange word. So it's about how much I want something, regardless of how it actually makes me feel.
Exactly. This is what we now call decision utility. Modern economic theory is built on the rational agent model. It's a core assumption.
The idea that we're all rational actors making logical choices.
Precisely. And that model assumes that if you want something, if you make a decision to get it, then you must like it.
Yeah.
It assumes that your decision utility and your experience utility are always the same thing.
So the assumption is, if I choose to eat a giant bag of extremely spicy chips, I must enjoy the experience of eating them. Because if I wouldn't enjoy it, I wouldn't choose it. I'm a rational agent, after all.
Right. A rational agent is supposed to know their own tastes, both now and in the future. They're supposed to make decisions that maximize their interests. So if you choose it, the economist just assumes it's because it maximizes your pleasure. If you buy a ticket to a movie, the assumption is you will enjoy the movie.
But the source material we have today drives a massive wedge right between those two things. It basically proves that what we want, our decision utility, often does not match what we actually enjoy, our experienced utility.
They can be completely different things. And this isn't just a philosophical debate about chips. The author of our main source, Kahneman, started noticing this discrepancy way back when he was working on his early theories. He came up with a thought experiment called the injection puzzle.
Okay, the injection puzzle.
This is a great example because it strips away all the emotion and context and just looks at the cold logic of pain. It removes all the variables like maybe I like the taste or maybe it's good for me. It's just a pure calculation of suffering.
So here's the scenario. I want everyone to picture this. Imagine a person who has to get a painful injection every single day for some medical condition.
Okay.
And a key detail here.
Yeah.
There is no adaptation. You don't get used to it. Day 1 hurts just as much as day 20. It's a constant, repeatable unit of pain.
Got it. Constant pain, no relief from getting used to it.
Now, the puzzle asks 2 questions to survey participants. Question A is, how much would you be willing to pay to reduce the total number of injections from 20 down to 18?
Okay, so you're skipping 2 shots. You're saving yourself 2 moments of pain.
Right. Then there's question B. How much would you pay to reduce the total number of injections from 6 down to 4?
So let's hold this up to the light. In both cases, the biological reality is identical, right?
Absolutely.
You are avoiding exactly 2 painful needle sticks. The experienced utility, the amount of pain you save, is exactly the same. Your body doesn't know if it's part of a set of 20 or a set of 6. It just knows I didn't get stabbed with a needle today.
Exactly. A rational person should be willing to pay the same amount in both scenarios. But here is the irrational result. When you ask people this, They are willing to pay significantly more to go from 6 to 4 than they are to go from 20 to 18.
Which, when you think about it for even a second, is completely absurd.
It is. Why is the 5th and 6th injection worth more to avoid than the 19th and 20th? It's the same pain.
It totally violates rational decision theory. If a unit of pain is constant, the value of removing that unit should also be constant. But our brains just don't work that way. We don't look at the absolute value, we look at the proportion.
Oh, okay.
Going from 6 to 4 feels like a huge relief. You're cutting the remaining pain by a third. That feels like a massive victory. But going from 20 to 18, that feels like a drop in the bucket. It feels almost negligible.
Even though the bucket is just your body feeling pain. Your nerves don't care about percentages. They care about needle pricks.
Precisely. This was an early clue for these researchers. It showed that our decision utility, how much we're willing to pay or what we choose, doesn't line up with our experienced utility, the actual physical reality of the pain. We're paying different amounts for the exact same physical relief. We are making a mistake.
And the text says something really interesting here. It says, in decision theory, the only basis for judging that a decision is wrong is inconsistency with other preferences. But here, the decision is objectively wrong because what's the phrase? It mismanages our own experience.
That's a key point. Usually an economist would say, hey, if you want to pay more for that, that's your business. That's your utility. Who am I to judge?
Right. The customer's always right.
But here we can objectively say you are wasting your money. You are acting against your own best interests by paying a premium to avoid the exact same amount of pain just because the numbers in the question are smaller. It suggests we need a better way to measure experience than just looking at what people choose.
We can't trust the customer to know what they're buying, essentially.
Exactly. We can't trust our own choices to reflect our own good.
Which brings us to the next section. How do we actually measure experience? If we can't trust what people choose and we can't trust what they say they want, how do we get a real reading on how much they're suffering or enjoying life?
To answer that, we have to travel back to the 19th century again, to an economist named Francis Edgeworth. He had this fascinating, kind of futuristic idea. He imagined a device he called a hedonimeter.
A hedonimeter. It sounds like something from a sci-fi movie or maybe a Ghostbusters gadget.
It does, but the concept is actually very grounded and logical. Think of it like a weather station, but for feelings. A weather station records the temperature continuously over time, right?
Yeah, it gives you a minute-by-minute graph.
Edgeworth imagined a needle that would fluctuate moment to moment, recording the intensity of pleasure or pain you're feeling right now.
So if I'm eating a great piece of cake, the needle goes way up into the positive zone. If I stub my toe, the needle spikes down into the negative zone.
Exactly. And according to Edgeworth, and according to basic logic, if you want to know the total happiness or pain of an event, you just have to look at the area under the curve.
Okay, let's unpack area under the curve for people who might have blocked out their high school calculus class. What does that actually mean in practice?
It basically just means intensity multiplied by time. Imagine a graph where the vertical axis is pain intensity and the horizontal axis is time. If you have a headache at a pain level of, say, 5 out of 10 for 10 minutes, that forms a rectangle on the graph.
Okay.
The area of that rectangle represents the total amount of suffering you endured. Now, if you have that same level 5 headache for 20 minutes, the rectangle is twice as long, the area doubles. You've experienced double the total suffering.
So time matters. Duration is a critical variable.
Time plays a critical role. In a rational world, if you double the duration of an experience, you should double the value or disvalue of that experience. That is the mathematical rational view. If a vacation is good, a longer vacation should be better. If a root canal is bad, a longer root canal should be worse.
But, as we're learning, humans are not mathematical devices. And this is where we have to transition from Edgeworth's imaginary machine to a very real, very uncomfortable study involving colonoscopies.
Yes. This is the pivotal study. It was conducted by Don Redelmeier and Daniel Kahneman in the early 1990s. And the context here is really important. We are not talking about modern colonoscopies where you get, the Michael Jackson juice and wake up remembering nothing.
Right. This was a different era of medicine.
In the 90s, colonoscopies were often done with much less effective anesthesia. They were painful, and patients were conscious enough to communicate throughout the procedure. It was intrusive, uncomfortable, and sometimes genuinely agonizing.
Ouch. Okay. So what did the researchers do in this study?
They studied 154 patients, and during the procedure, every 60 seconds, they prompted the patients to rate their current level of pain on a scale of 0 to 10. 0 being no pain, 10 being absolutely intolerable pain.
So they were essentially building a real-life heat emitter. They were plotting the pain graph in real time, minute by minute, capturing the true voice of the experiencing self.
Exactly. And the source material highlights two specific patients, just labeled patient A and patient B, to illustrate what they found. I want you to really try to picture these two graphs in your mind.
Okay, let's visualize patient A first.
Yeah.
What was their experience like?
Patient A had a relatively short procedure. It lasted about 8 minutes in total. The pain went up and down, and it hit a peak of about 8 out of 10. So pretty intense.
Okay.
And then at the 8-minute mark, the procedure ended abruptly while the pain was still quite high around a 7.
So short, intense, and a bad ending, like ripping a Band-Aid off quickly. Now, what about patient B?
Patient B had a much, much longer procedure. It lasted 24 minutes.
24 minutes, that's 3 times as long.
3 times as long. That's a long time to be in that kind of discomfort. Patient B also had spikes of pain that hit that same 8 out of 10 level. In fact, if you were to calculate the area under the curve, patient B clearly suffered much, much more. They had all the pain patient A had, plus an additional 16 minutes of fluctuating pain.
So from a purely mathematical standpoint, patient B had it way worse.
No question. But, and this is the crucial difference, in the final few minutes of patient B's procedure, the doctor wasn't moving the scope around as much. The pain tapered off. It went all the way down to a 2, then a 1, right before it finally ended.
So patient B has a huge amount of total pain, much more area under the curve, but they had a gentle ending, a soft landing.
Correct. Now, if you are a rational observer or if you are Edgeworth with his heat emitter, you have to conclude that patient B had the worst experience. There's no contest. They suffered for 24 minutes versus 8 minutes with similar peak intensities.
But that's not what the patient said afterwards, is it?
No. And this is the real shocker. After the procedure is over, the researchers asked the patients a simple question. On the whole, how would you rate the total amount of pain you experienced? They didn't ask them to do math. They just asked for their overall impression. How bad was it?
You'd expect patient B to say, it was agonizing, it went on forever and ever.
You would. But the analysis of their answers revealed two distinctive rules that completely defied that area under the curve logic. The first rule is called the peak end rule.
The peak end rule, what is that?
The study found that a patient's retrospective rating, their memory of how bad it was, could be perfectly predicted by taking the average of just 2 moments. The worst moment, the peak, and the final moment, the end.
Wait, that's it? Just those 2 data points? All the other minutes in between didn't matter?
Just those 2. The rest of the minutes, whether there were 5 or 25 of them, were statistically invisible. So let's look at our patients again through that lens. Patient A had a peak of 8 and an end of 7.
Okay, 8 and 7.
The average of 8 and 7 is 7.5. So patient A's memory assigned the whole experience a pain rating of 7.5.
Pretty bad. That's a high score.
Very high. Now, patient B, they had a peak of 8, but their end was a 1. The average of 8 and 1 is 4.5. So patient B, who suffered for 3 times as long, rated the experience as significantly milder than patient A.
That is absolutely wild. Because the ending was better, the entire memory was what sort of cleansed, the memory was averaged down.
Exactly. And this leads directly to the second rule, which is perhaps even more disturbing: duration neglect.
Duration neglect.
The statistical analysis showed that the duration of the procedure had no effect whatsoever on the ratings of total pain. It just didn't matter. Whether it lasted 10 minutes or 20 minutes or 60 minutes, it didn't change the memory. The part of our brain that keeps score, the remembering self, it simply does not care about time. It only cares about the highlights, the peak, and the curtain call, the end.
This is a huge deal. It means we are essentially blind to the quantity of our own life experiences when we look back on them. We only see the snapshots. We don't remember the movie. We remember the storyboard.
That's a perfect metaphor. We don't remember the movie, we remember the trailer.
Yeah.
And the trailer is always edited to show the biggest explosion and the final dramatic scene. If those 2 moments are good, we say the movie was good. If those are bad, we say the movie was bad, even if the 90 minutes in between were wonderful.
So this creates a massive internal conflict, and you've called it the tyranny of the remembering self.
Yes, because we have these 2 distinct entities inside us. First, there's the experiencing self. This is the self that answers the question, does it hurt now? It lives entirely in the present moment. It feels the second-by-second reality of life. But this self has no voice in our decisions.
Because once the moment is gone, it's gone. It just evaporates.
Yeah.
It has no way to report back.
Right. Then we have the remembering self. This is the one that answers the question, how was it on the whole? This self is our internal storyteller. It keeps the score. It governs what we learn from our past and what we decide to do in the future. And the problem is, the remembering self is often just plain wrong about the reality of the experience. It distorts the truth.
The source material poses a really interesting ethical question for doctors here. Imagine you're the doctor performing that colonoscopy. You have two objectives you could aim for. Objective A is to reduce the memory of pain.
Okay.
You could do this by, say, keeping the patient on the table for a few extra minutes, just waiting for the pain to subside to a very mild level before you stop.
Which would, of course, increase the actual suffering of the experiencing self. You are physically hurting them for longer, but you're giving the remembering self a much better story to tell.
Exactly. Or there's objective B. Reduce the actual amount of experienced pain. Get the procedure done as fast as humanly possible. Rip that Band-Aid off, even if it means ending on a high pain note.
And this is the dilemma. The source points out that most people, when you ask them, they intuitively favor reducing the memory of pain. They would rather their past self suffer longer if it means their present self doesn't remember it as being so bad.
We identify with our remembering self. It's like we treat the experiencing self like a stranger, like some other person who has to endure the hard stuff for us.
That's it, exactly.
There is a story in the text that perfectly illustrates this ruining the memory concept. It's about a man listening to a symphony.
Ah, yes, the scratch disc anecdote.
Right.
This really clarifies the difference between the two selves.
So this guy is at home. He's listening to a beautiful symphony on a record. 40 minutes of absolute musical bliss. He is just in heaven. The experiencing self is having a fantastic time.
Okay.
But then, right at the very end of the recording, there's a horrible scratch on the disc. And it makes this awful loud screeching sound that lasts for just a few seconds before it's over.
And what did he say about it?
He said the bad ending ruined the whole experience.
But did it? This is the key question the author asks. The text argues that the experience was not ruined. The experience had already happened. He had 40 minutes of genuine joy. That is a fact of history. The screech didn't travel back in time and turn the beautiful music into noise.
But his memory was ruined.
Exactly. The remembering self assigned a failing grade to the entire 40-minute episode based on the final second. It completely ignored the 40 minutes of bliss. This is what's meant by a cognitive illusion. We confuse the experience with the memory of the experience. We think the memory is the experience, but it's not. It's just a distorted, biased summary.
And the text calls this the tyranny of the remembering self. We treat the memory as the only thing that actually counts in the end.
Yeah.
It reminds me of people who go on vacation and spend the entire time stressed out about getting the perfect photo for Instagram.
Yes.
If they get the photo, the trip was a success. If they don't, the trip was a waste, even if they had a good time moment to moment.
That's a perfect modern application of this. We work to maximize the quality of our future memories, not the quality of our current experiences. We are literally living for the scrapbook, not for the moment. We endure heat and long lines and exhaustion, all just to get that one peak moment to store in the memory vault.
So far, we've talked about observational studies like the colonoscopy one and anecdotes. But scientists, they like proof. They like to control the variables. They want to see if people will actually choose more pain in a controlled setting.
Right.
So to really nail this down, to prove that people will actually choose more pain just to satisfy their rug, remembering self Kahneman and his team designed the cold hand experiment.
This is really the smoking gun of this entire deep dive. This experiment was designed specifically to pit the experiencing self against the remembering self in a kind of gladiator match. It removes all the messy variables of the colonoscopy, like the doctor's skill or the patient's anxiety, and makes it pure physics and pain.
Okay, so walk us through the setup. This is the cold pressor study.
Participants are asked to hold their hand up to the wrist in water that's kept at a constant 14 degrees Celsius. Now, as we said, 14 degrees is painfully cold. It's not damaging. It won't give you frostbite in that short time, but it hurts. It activates your pain receptors pretty intensely.
And while their hand is in the water, what are they doing?
With their other free hand, they're constantly rating their pain on a scale. So again, we have a direct real-time line to the experiencing self. We know exactly what it's feeling.
And they had to undergo 2 different episodes, right? Everyone did both.
Yes, everyone did both in a random order. First, let's describe the short episode. It's very simple. You put your hand in the 14-degree water for 60 seconds. At the 60-second mark, the researcher says, stop. You pull your hand out, and they give you a nice warm towel.
Simple enough. 60 seconds of intense pain. A bad ending, because the pain is high right when you stop.
Right. Now, the long episode, this is where it gets clever. It starts exactly the same. Your hand goes into 14-degree water for 60 seconds. But at the 60-second mark, the researcher doesn't say stop. Instead, they secretly open a valve that lets slightly warmer water flow into the tub.
Okay.
Over the next 30 seconds, the temperature of the water rises by about 1 degree to 15 degrees Celsius.
Now, 15 degrees is still cold, right? It's not like a warm bath.
Oh, absolutely. It's still very painful. But it is detectably less painful than 14 degrees. So for those last 30 seconds, the pain intensity drops slightly. Then, after 90 seconds total, the hand comes out.
So let's just recap this so it's crystal clear. The short episode, 60 seconds of intense pain. The long episode, the exact same 60 seconds of intense pain, plus 30 more seconds of moderate pain.
Correct.
So mathematically, logically, the long episode is strictly worse. It contains the short episode plus a bonus round of suffering.
Exactly. From the perspective of the experiencing self, the long episode is objectively a worse deal. There's no question. You are voluntarily taking on more total pain units.
So here is the twist. 7 minutes later, after they've had a break, the participants are told they have to do a third trial. And they get to choose which one. The experimenter asks them, which one would you like to repeat, the short episode or the long episode?
Now, keep in mind, they just experienced both of them. They felt the difference. They knew one lasted longer. If they were rational agents trying to maximize their comfort, 100% of them should choose the short episode. I mean, why would you volunteer for 30 extra seconds of pain?
But that's not what happened.
Not even close. 80% of the participants who noticed that slight warming at the end of the long episode chose to repeat the long episode.
80%. They volunteered for unnecessary pain. That is just staggering.
They did, and let's be very clear. They weren't masochists, they didn't enjoy the pain, they simply made a profound mistake in their decision-making.
Why? What was the mechanism?
It was a perfect demonstration of the peak-end rule and duration neglect. Think about the memory of the shared episode. The peak was bad at 14 degrees. The end was also bad at 14 degrees, so the average is very bad. Now think about the memory of the long episode. The peak was bad at 14 degrees, but the end was better at 15 degrees. The average of the peak and the end is lower. So the remembering self looks at its own distorted scorecard and says, hey, that long episode wasn't as bad as the other one. Let's do that one again.
It completely ignores the fact that it was 50% longer.
Completely. Duration neglect just erases the timeline. The 90 seconds versus 60 seconds didn't register in the final judgment. Only the quality of the ending registered. They chose the option they disliked the least in their memory, even though it meant they would have to suffer more in reality.
The text mentions that if you ask them a different question, like, would you prefer a 90-second immersion or only the first 60 seconds of it? They would obviously choose the short one.
Of course.
But because the choice was framed as repeat trial A or trial B, they relied on their flawed intuitive memory.
Precisely. Their decision was governed by a very simple rule of intuitive choice. Pick the one you remember most fondly, or in this case, least painfully. And this experiment really proves that we cannot trust our own preferences to reflect our actual interests. The remembering self is making choices that the experiencing self has to pay for in pain.
This connects directly to something else mentioned in the sources, the less is more effect. The text talks about a study with dinner plates that seems completely unrelated, but it's actually the exact same mechanism at work.
Yes, Christopher C.'s dish study. It's a fantastic parallel. He showed people two different sets of dishes that were being sold at a clearance sale.
Okay.
Set A was a set of 24 intact, perfect dishes. Set B was the same 24 intact dishes plus 8 broken ones.
So economically, set B is worth more, or at least the same. You get all the good dishes plus some scrap you can just throw away.
Right, you're getting more stuff. But when he asked people how much they'd be willing to pay for each set, they consistently valued set A, the smaller set, higher.
Because the broken dishes drag down the average quality of the whole set.
Exactly. Our intuitive brain, what Kahneman calls System 1, it works on averages, norms, and prototypes. It doesn't do sums. It's not an accountant. It looks at set B and sees a broken mixed set. It looks at set A and sees a perfect set. The average quality of set A is higher, even though the total quantity of value in set B is technically higher.
And the same thing is happening with the pain. The long episode is like the set with the broken dishes. It has more pain overall, but the average pain feels lower because of that mild ending. So we buy it. We buy the broken set of pain because the average feels better in our memory.
We are bad at integration. We are bad at summing things up over time. We are great at taking snapshots and averaging them. And in this context, less is more because less often has a higher average quality than more.
But why? I mean, from an evolutionary perspective, why would we be wired this way? You'd think an animal that can accurately calculate total pain or total pleasure would survive better, Why would nature give us a brain that just ignores duration?
That's the big evolutionary question. And the source material offers a really interesting way to think about it by comparing us to two different animals, rats and squirrels.
Okay, I'm listening. Rats versus squirrels. Break it down for me.
Okay, think about a squirrel. A squirrel needs to store food for the winter. Does the squirrel care about the average size of the nuts it finds, or does it care about the total amount of food it has stored?
It definitely cares about the total. If it has a few giant nuts, but not enough total food to last the winter, it dies. It needs the sum. It needs to be a good accountant.
Exactly. So for a squirrel, evolution should favor a brain that can do sums. I have enough is a summation problem. But now think about a rat or a human dealing with something like pain or fear. If you touch a hot stove or if you see a predator, does the duration of that threat matter as much as its intensity?
I guess the intensity is the primary signal. It's a danger. Run signal.
Right. The biological priority is to react to the peak threat. How bad is this? Will it kill me? The duration is secondary. If a lion attacks you, the intensity of the attack tells you if you're dead or alive.
So we are wired more like the rats in this scenario. We're wired to track the peaks.
And the ends. The end of an event tells us if we survived and if it's safe to relax now. They've actually done studies on rats that confirm this. They conditioned rats to fear a light that signaled an impending electric shock. And they found that the duration of the shock had almost no effect on how much fear the rat showed. Only the intensity of the shock mattered.
That's fascinating.
There are even brain stimulation studies where rats will starve themselves to get little bursts of intense pleasure injected directly into their brains. Researchers found that increasing the duration of that pleasure burst didn't make the rats want it more. Only increasing the intensity did. So our remembering self, this mechanism that tracks peaks and ends, it seems to have a very deep evolutionary history.
It wasn't designed for complex modern decisions like which medical procedure should I choose or how long should my vacation be.
It was designed for, is this dangerous and is it over?
And now we're using that primitive software to make complicated life choices, which leads us to the real-world implications of all this. Because we aren't just rats in a lab. We are people getting divorced, planning retirements, making huge medical choices.
Let's talk about divorce. The text explicitly mentions this as a perfect example. Imagine a couple was married for 10 years. For 9 of those years, they were genuinely happy. It was a good marriage. But the last year was toxic, fighting, bitterness, a messy, painful divorce. How do people usually describe that marriage afterwards?
They say it was a disaster, it was a failed marriage, I wasted a decade of my life.
Exactly. They let the bad ending define the entire decade. They say the bad ending proves it was all a lie from the start. But that's the peak end rule and duration neglect in action. You are throwing away 9 years of experienced utility, of actual happiness that happened, because the end was painful.
That is profound. The fact that it ended badly does not mean it was all bad. But try telling that to someone going through a breakup. It's a hard pill to swallow.
It's incredibly hard to accept emotionally because the remembering self is so dominant. But it's true. The experiencing self had 9 good years. That has real value that shouldn't be erased. But the remembering self has a bad story, and the remembering self always wins the argument.
It really makes you rethink how we plan things. Take vacations. I mentioned this earlier. We usually plan vacations to maximize the memories we'll have. We go to the Eiffel Tower, not just to see it, but to have seen it, to have the memory and the photo.
And that's not necessarily wrong, but we should be aware of the trade-off. If you were planning a vacation strictly for your experiencing self, you might just stay home, sleep late, and read a book. No travel stress, no lines, just moment-to-moment comfort.
But the remembering self would hate that. It would say, I did nothing with my week off.
Right. So we drag our experiencing selves through airports and crowded museums so the remembering self has a nice trophy to put on its mental shelf.
It's like we are working for a tyrannical boss who demands these perfect reports, but doesn't actually do any of the work. The experiencing self does the work. The remembering self just files the report.
That is a brilliant analogy. The experiencing self does all the heavy lifting. It feels the cold water, it endures the colonoscopy, it sits in the traffic jam. The remembering self just writes the review on Yelp afterwards. And the problem is, we make all our future decisions based on that Yelp review, not on the actual work conditions.
So what is the takeaway here? If we know our remembering self is a bit of a tyrant and just plain bad at math, what do we do about it?
Well, I think awareness is the first and most powerful step. When you are making a decision, especially a big medical one or a financial one, ask yourself, am I trying to minimize actual suffering or am I just trying to manage the future memory of it?
So question your own motives.
Yes. If you have to do something painful, realize that ripping the Band-Aid off, the short, painful option, is probably the rational choice for your body, even if your mind hates the way it ends. And conversely, if you are going through a tough time, try to consciously engineer a soft landing. If you can end a painful experience on a slightly better note, your memory of the entire event will be less traumatic. That's a valid way to hack your own brain for your own good.
That's actually really practical advice. If you're having a really bad day, try to do one small, nice thing before you go to sleep. It might just rewrite the score for the whole day in your memory.
Exactly. Hack the peak end rule. End on a high note, or at least a less low note.
But there's this bigger philosophical challenge here that we can't really escape. The text says inconsistency is built into our minds. We want pain to be brief, but we remember it based on peaks and ends. We can't fully trust our own preferences to guide us.
No, we can't. And that's a humbling realization. The rational agent model of humanity is a fantasy. We are biological creatures with specific and sometimes buggy wiring, and part of that wiring prioritizes the story over the reality.
It's been a fascinating ride through the mechanics of our own minds today. We've gone from Bentham's pleasure and pain to the cold logic of the injection puddle, through the colonoscopy ward and into the ice bucket. And the common thread through all of it is this deep conflict between our two selves.
The experiencing self, the one who is living right now, hearing these words, and the remembering self, the one who will summarize this deep dive later on.
Hopefully with a good rating.
Hopefully.
Before we sign off, I want to leave everyone a final thought, a bit of a provocation to take with you.
Let's hear it.
This is something that comes up in discussions of this theory, and I want you, our listeners, to really chew on this. Imagine you could book the perfect vacation. I'm talking your absolute dream trip. Perfect weather, amazing food, the love of your life is there, whatever you want. The experiencing self will have the time of its life, an absolute 10 out of 10.
Sounds great.
But here's the catch. At the very end of the trip, just before you board the plane home, you have to take a special pill. And that pill will completely wipe your memory of the entire vacation. You will have zero recollection that it ever happened. No photos, no journals, no stories, no memories. It will be a complete blank. The question is, would you still go?
That is the ultimate test, isn't it?
If you say no, and most people's gut reaction is to say no, then you have to admit you aren't living for the experience, you are living for the memory. You are serving the remembering self, not the experiencing self.
And if you say yes, well, then you might be a true hedonist. You value the moment purely for its own sake, regardless of the story you get to tell later.
Which self are you living for? Something to think about. Thank you for diving deep with us today.
Always a pleasure.
See you next time.